Hi, this is Eric Martin with Board Game Geek. I'm here today looking at Shibuya, designed by Yusuke Sato, a new board game party, the designer and publisher responsible for the Time Bomb series of party games. Shibuya is very different from those games in that it feels very much like a two-player abstract strategy game. Although there is a four-player option, there's some luck of the draw, there's some other elements, but the feeling of it is two-player abstract strategy. Now, Shibuya is one of the city wards in Tokyo, Japan, but when you hear the name Shibuya, you might associate it with the famous intersection outside Shibuya Station on the JR Yamanote line, where all the lights turn red at once, where there's multiple streets coming together, and the streets are just swarmed with hundreds of people, crossing in minutes, and then lights change back. Everyone starts piling up again for the next wave of people. It's a little strange to think of an intersection as being world famous. I mean, Times Square is in New York City. We all know that. Shibuya also famous just for being super crowded and busy, and then fun to watch just the waves of people in there. So if you get the chance, you should go do it. Until then, you can play this game, which is about crossing the street faster than the other player can do so. Here's a two-player setup for Shibuya ready to play. I have skipped the drafting phase in this example because the drafting doesn't make sense until you actually see the movement of the pedestrians and how someone can cross the board and how you can block them through the placement of tiles. So you might actually want to play a game in this manner before you start drafting to play a regular game. On a turn, you are going to pick one of your pedestrians, and you're going to choose either black or white, or square or circle, and you move that pedestrian as far as you wish along that particular element. So if red player chooses black, I can move this one, he enters on a black space, moves across the board here. The blue player could choose white, and actually move someone all the way across the board. And as soon as you reach that exit row, you immediately hop up onto the curb, and you're across the street. And what you're trying to do is get 6 pedestrians across the street first. Or, as a mercy rule, if you have 3 more pedestrians across the street than the opposing player, you win instantly. Game ends. Red player on their turn could choose white and can move over to this exit space, or circle and can move across either row of circles and exit in any location. And the choice you will make depends on the setup of the board and the other movement possibilities available to your pedestrians. You cannot stop in the opposing space. So if this red piece chose black, you cannot move over and just sit in front of this pedestrian here, thumbing your nose at them and keeping them from entering the board. You could stop here, and maybe that would do something as well. Because this one, if they choose black or circles, they're not going very far. So they just have to sit there as long as this red piece is here. On a turn, instead of moving a pedestrian, you can choose to take the top tile of the board and place it onto an empty location that does not already have 2 tiles. You can't crush the opposing pedestrian with this concrete falling from the sky. No. But you can block them and interrupt their movement paths so that they can't get somewhere. Or, of course, you can create movement paths of your own. So if I do something like this, the red player may take a turn, and on the next turn, if blue is not blocked, they can move this one onto white and then continue on white all the way across the board, with this one piece being set up as well. But perhaps the red player will do something to block that. There we go. And now the red player can move across on their own turn, except if blocked by the blue player. Once you've played one game of Shibuya, the drafting makes a lot more sense. You start with an empty board, so you only have the row of pedestrians, the row of exit feet, empty spaces in the middle. You pick up a tile and you put it in one of the 16 locations. And you continue taking turns doing that until you have your 4x4 board, building up paths for yourself and blocking the opponent while you're doing this. There's one optional rule in the game where instead of building the entire board first and then playing, you can choose on a turn to either place a tile on the board or move one of your pedestrians, which means that even if you have only a couple of tiles in play, you can already start moving pieces across the street. It's a more interesting option in a way because you have that decision of whether you're trying to build up paths that will lead you across the street or just get someone out there and block what the opponent might be trying to do by putting pedestrians in their way as they are starting to move across the street. A little different element and feel to the game as you're building things up. Shibuya also has a 4-player setup in which you draft the tiles as in a 2-player game, with or without the optional rule. The winning conditions are still the same. The only difference is in the starting setup, and that I can move pedestrians who are not yet in the intersection only if they are on my side of the board. So on my turn, perhaps I choose circle, I can move this pedestrian over to here, and then my partner on their turn could choose white and finish moving that pedestrian across the street. Or perhaps not. This is a great blocking place for the red side. Since you can't stand immediately in front of their exit, maybe you want to stand right here. This player can go in at any time, unless the red player drops a tile there. And just wait, and we'll see what happens. And there's an overview of Shibuya, which I played 6 times now on a review copy from Japan Brand, which is distributing this 2017 release at Spiel 2018, probably in a multilingual English, German, Japanese version, as is often the case for Japan Brand. I've played only with 2 players. I've played with a random board setup, with the drafting rule, and with the optional drafting and moving rule where you can move pedestrians before the road is finished, which is kind of fun because you think of pedestrians moving across the street and then there's like a gaping chasm that they cannot cross, and then some worker is just pushing up parts of the street from below, sort of like a video game style. Next turn, now I can start to hop across. All right, that works. It works to teach the game with a random setup. That is usually my style. I prefer to learn by playing, and I prefer to teach by playing. Actually get someone into the game and be like, this is an introductory game. Don't worry about winning or losing. Just figure out how things function in the game, how they work, what you're going to do. We finish the game, and then we'll actually do a draft and play. That works for me. I don't know if it necessarily works for you, but you kind of need that experience of moving the pedestrians across the street, seeing how you can block or not block other pedestrians based on the board setup, and then that all informs your choices as you're drafting and placing tiles. The corner spots are really tricky because, of course, if you move those pedestrians on the end, you can't just move them up that same line and stop them there because you cannot stop and block the opponent's entrance or exit row. So you have to be able to move them up and then move them into the board. But can you do that? It depends on how the tiles have been placed. And with smart placement of the tiles and a little luck with what you're going to draw, you can really stuff the opponent and make it impossible for them to move, and then they will need to draw tiles and adjust those spaces, assuming they get something that they can work with. Right? Drawing tiles feels like a waste. It feels like you shouldn't have to do that, because often if you're trying to set up a nice path for yourself, well, maybe you could have just gone half with one move and then the other half with the next move, which is the same as drawing a tile and placing it and then going all the way up. But you don't know if you're going to get a good tile for that. And even blocking the other person, that's hard to do as well. Once someone gets in the next to last row, you cannot stop that piece from getting all the way across. So you have to stop them earlier. And you really need to see that in play, and that sort of informs your decisions of what you're going to do during the game itself. It's a very short game when you play, 10 to 15 minutes with the actual playing time, so you can always play once and then cross the street again, back and forth like maniacs. I just hope no one stares at you, taking pictures and putting them on Instagram. Look at these people, just crossing the street over and over again. Lunatics.